In this video, I'm going to teach you a concept that has existed in chess for a very long time, but for some reason it doesn't really have a name as far as I know, and I wanted to show you what it was so you can understand pawn structures better and you understand how to kind of manipulate pawn structures in your favor. So let's take a look at this position. This is a position that was recently featured in one of my videos, in the Nimzo Larsen video, and it is actually the position that gave me the idea about this concept. And the concept itself is called the phantom pawns. So in this position right now, there are no phantom pawns. So let me show you when we can create our phantom pawn. So let's say we play this move bishop to a3 here, the best move, trying to trade off the dark square bishops. Now, the problem here for black is that if black trades off the dark square bishops, of course, we will simply just take back with the knight. And then what we will do is we will maneuver our pieces around. For example, this knight can go to c3, a4, c5, and this is a very powerful position. Let's say rook to c1 is played, bishop to b7, and we get a position like this, where we can even remaneuver this knight. We can go knight to b1, and then we can put this knight on c3, and black doesn't really have a ton of good moves in knight a4, and then this knight is coming to c5. So this c5 square is an extremely weak square in the black's camp. However, going back, black doesn't want to take, and black doesn't have to take on a3. Black can instead play bishop to d6, and after takes, black is not going to take with the queen, because again, this creates this sort of a weakness. On the c5 square, we can once again go knight c3, knight a4, knight c5. Instead, black takes with the pawn, and black thinks, haha, I am so smart, because with the pawn captures on d6, I have this very nice pawn controlling c5 and controlling e5. All of my problems are gone. And actually, that is not the case, and black still has major problems to solve, because we have this move c takes d5. And after black has to take back, of course, and after c takes d5, we get to this position. And now, if you count the material here, and if you count the pawns specifically, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns for each side. However, there is a huge problem here for the black pieces. And that problem is that this pawn on d6, which is black's equivalent pawn of b3, because white has a b pawn and black has an extra d pawn. The problem with this pawn is that it just simply cannot move. It's not a mobile pawn. It cannot move forward. It cannot capture anything because there's nothing on c5 and e5. So in any endgame, white can push these pawns. If all the pieces are traded off, white can go b4, a4, b5 and create a passed pawn on b5. But black cannot do the same with f4 or even g5, f4. This cannot be done for black because this pawn is completely frozen here on d6. So even though it's equal material, this pawn right here is what I like to call a phantom pawn. It's not really there. I mean, the pawn itself exists and it controls important squares, but it doesn't have any other value beyond that, and it's never going to have any other value beyond that because it's stuck here on d6. And white has a very simple plan here. Knight c3, castle, knight f4, target the pawns over here, and then just bring the rooks over to the c-file, and then dominate the whole c-file and trade the pieces off, and any endgame, any king and pawn endgame is immediately winning for the white pieces. And that is the problem with these phantom pawns. Now let's take a look at this position, and this position is not similar to the last one at all. However, we can still create a phantom pawn from here. Now, how do we create a phantom pawn? We need to go bishop takes c6. Now, this is going to look really weird to a lot of people for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a bishop versus a knight, so we don't necessarily want to trade bishop for a knight for no reason. And two, it is a very powerful bishop. It's not just a bishop, it's a bishop that's putting tremendous pressure on this diagonal. And we are exchanging it, and then we are creating this structure. So we get rid of our very good bishop that defends our light squares. Now, why do we want to do something like this? How can we use this structure to our advantage? Let me show you how. So we continue developing with d3, queen to f3, knight to d2, and then we castle. So normal development so far. Queen b6 was played to guard the pawn on c6. And the problem here for black pieces is that black is really passive. Black needs a pawn break to activate his pieces. He either needs a5, a4, or he needs to execute e5. The best move in the position is actually to play a5. And then, okay, a4 is not the best move, but it is a very natural follow-up in these types of positions. And a4 is a move that when you look at it, it makes sense. It's a good move because we want to take, we want to create a target on b3. Also, we want to open up our, well, black wants to open up his rook. But the thing is, in this position, we can take the pawn on a4. And after rook takes a4, now I want you to look at this position. I want you to count the material. So both sides have h pawns, both sides have g pawns, and f pawns as well. The equivalent of this pawn on e6 is the pawn on f4. So both sides have those pawns as well. And if we neutralize all of the pawns, we are left with these two pawns. The pawn on a2 and the pawn on c6. And the pawn on c6 is actually a phantom pawn. It is a pawn for black, but it is not a good pawn. It doesn't really serve a purpose right now or even in the future. It's not going to serve any purpose because it's frozen here on c6, while this pawn has a lot of potential because in a couple of moves, you could, hypothetically speaking, push this pawn up the board. And in any endgame, once again, white is winning. Because even though technically you're not up a pawn here with the white pieces, it feels like it because this pawn is a phantom pawn. It's not really doing anything. So the value of this pawn greatly exceeds the value of the pawn on c6. And in this case, you would do something like rook to b1, hit the queen has to move, you can play a3 to defend the pawn with the bishop, and then you can slowly but surely start trading the pieces off. You can start to dominate the e-file as well. Let's say in this position black plays, I don't even know what black should play, maybe let's say rook to b8 or something. No problem, we can just trade. We can even play a move like knight to e4. It's not the best move, but I'm just trying to highlight an idea. We can trade the knights as well. And then we can start to bring our rook to the b file, or we can bring our queen first to the b file. And any endgame benefits white pieces because this pawn right here is completely frozen. Well, first of all, I guess the pawn has to be defended, and then rook to e1 can be played, g6. And then you have a couple of ways to continue. For example, computer really likes this approach with g4, which is a bit ludicrous because you're like sacrificing everything and you're going for a massive attack. This is a crazy line. But even if you don't go for something like this, you have a very, very powerful position because any endgame is going to be winning for you. You can bring the queen back over to c2, play bishop b2, rook b1, and start to work on the b file and win the endgame rather than going for an attack on the king. It's possible you can play g4 apparently, but remember that this is a phantom pawn. We have this very nice pawn on a3, which is technically not an extra pawn, but it is a very powerful pawn, and black just simply cannot use his pawn while we can use ours. Now I want to talk about Caro-Kann briefly, and I actually want to talk about the Tartakower variation of the Caro-Kann, this one. And okay, I have mentioned this in a couple of videos already, maybe like 4 or 5. And this is going to be my last time mentioning the Caro-Kann Tartakower in regards to the pawn structure, because I've mentioned this in a bunch of my videos. So in this position, this is a phantom pawn on f6 or f7. You can call whichever one you want. You can call whichever pawn you want the phantom pawn. Now, why is this structure not exactly great for black? The reason is that in any endgame, white can simply create a passed pawn with c4, d5, but black cannot do the same with this 4-on-3 majority. So black has to utilize his open lines and open diagonals to attack white and create some dynamic chances. However, if I skip forward, let's say we get to a position like this where a lot of pieces have been traded off just like this. Like we get to this position. This is a winning endgame for white because this pawn right here is a phantom pawn. And what tends to happen in these positions is that I'm actually just going to push the pawns. I know that bringing the kings is the best way to start out, but I just want to highlight the idea. So what can happen here is that black will simply push his pawns, right? And we're just going to move back and forth. But the problem is that he cannot create a breakthrough if he goes g4, that just simply doesn't do anything. Computer even wants to take on g4. I'm not going to take just to showcase the idea. I'm just going to go king d2. The problem is that if black pushes, now the whole position closes down. And if black takes, now these are all isolated pawns, and the double isolated pawns are not helping anybody. We can still create our passed pawn with c4 and d5. So the way we would win this endgame, let's go all the way back to this position. The way we would win this endgame is by both sides will bring their kings here, and then we will eventually, let's say b5 is played, we can still play c4, and we will create a passed pawn eventually. Black can push his own pawns, but it doesn't matter. He can't really do anything. He can try something like h6, but we can always go h4. He can go f6. We can go g3, h5. But the problem is, even if this pawn is pushed, if it takes anybody, it doesn't matter. There is no breakthrough here for black. But white can create a breakthrough. And the way we would win this is by temporarily sacrificing the pawn on d5. And then we would use this pawn as a decoy. And then we would get to black's pawns over here. So we would simply just devour all of the pawns just like this. And of course, this is a winning king and pawn endgame. We're simply queening. So this is how you utilize the concept of phantom pawns. You need to trade off all the pieces. I can show the entire sequence from the very beginning. Of course, you don't have to remember all of this, but you just want to trade the pieces off. You just want to get all the pieces off the board. You want to get rid of all of them, and then you want to start trading all the pieces as much as you can. Now in this case, of course, I played some bad moves for black, but the idea still stands that you need to trade off all the pieces, and if you are able to do that, then you will be able to take advantage of your opponent's phantom pawn, and you're going to be in a winning king and pawn endgame. A very similar concept applies to other variations as well. So for example, let's talk about the Spanish momentarily. In the Spanish, we can take and then we can play d4, and we can go into this variation right here where black has 4 on 3 on the queen side, white has 4 on 3 on the king side, but the c pawn is a phantom pawn. So in any endgame similar to the Tartakower variation, this is going to be a major weakness. Now, it doesn't mean that the position is winning for white right away. That's not the case. As a matter of fact, according to the computer, black is very, very slightly better because of the bishop pair, and that's another concept that's very important. However, again, if all the pieces get traded off, this structure is simply going to be winning for the white pieces, because these pawns will not be able to create a passed pawn, while the 4 on 3 on the king side will easily be able to create a passed pawn. Now I want you to use the concepts that I have taught you and come up with a plan in this position. You can't exactly force a phantom pawn from this position onward, but you can threaten the phantom pawn, and you can also create a target for yourself. So you might not achieve the phantom pawn, but you might be able to achieve some sort of positional edge. So in this case, I want you to come up with the plan for the black pieces and try to find the correct moves and ideas. So I'm going to give you 3 seconds to pause the video. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so there are many ways you can go about this position, and the position is technically equal, so there is not a singular correct move. There are multiple moves that work in this position. For example, one of the moves is c5. Just striking on the queen side and putting a lot of pressure on the pawn on d4. And after a move like queen to c2, because the white wants to move the queen out of this sort of a pin here, and then black will take on d4, and here white has to make a very uncomfortable decision. What's funny is that the correct move in this position is c takes d4, which looks very counterintuitive because now white has a phantom pawn. If this e4 pawn break happens, we don't have to react to it. So for example, if white ever, let me make a random move. If white ever makes this move e4, we don't have to do it. We don't want to take and undouble our opponent's pawns. No, we want their pawns to remain just like this. I'm going to make another random move. This is not a good move, by the way. And the reason is because this is a phantom pawn on d3, and this is very uncomfortable for the white pieces because, again, in any king and pawn endgame, the black pieces will win because you will simply push these pawns forward. And from here, your goal with black is to start trading the pieces off. So going back, instead of that, the best move is actually c takes d4, but if your opponent wants to avoid the phantom pawns and let's say he takes with the e pawn in this case, the problem is that the pawn on c3 is going to be a target forever. So you didn't necessarily achieve the phantom pawn, but you can go rook to c8. You have created a target on c3, so you can target this. Let's say rook f to c1, and then you can simply double up over here. You can play a move like rook c6, and then go rook to c8, and then bishop to g5, and rook c8, bishop d2 has to be played. And okay, you kind of have to move the queen out of the way, or you can do a couple of different things. You can actually even strike with e5 yourself to create some activity for yourself. Or if you don't want to do that, you have some alternatives as well. You can also play something like queen a6, b5, bring the knight to a4, and then continue to pressure the pawn on c3. So as I said, you have multiple plans from this position. And if your opponent does not want to create phantom pawn for himself, he has to take with the e-pawn, which creates a target in his position, which you can utilize, you can attack, and you can put tremendous pressure on the pawn on c3 if he doesn't take with the c-pawn and if he doesn't create a phantom pawn for himself. Now, just to summarize everything and to briefly talk about what we have already discussed, in this position, even though black is technically closer to the center here, white is completely winning. Even though it's equal material, black has 3-on-2 on the queen side, white has 3-on-2 on the king side. But the problem is that this pawn on b5 is a phantom pawn. So in this position, we can go f4. We can bring our king. Both sides will bring their kings. And our goal is very simple. We want to go g4. And we want to go f5 at an opportune moment. Not immediately, but at the correct moment we want to play f5. But the problem is that black simply cannot do anything on the queen side despite having a 3-on-2. Black can try to push, and black can keep trying to push, but it doesn't really matter because we can go b3, b5, and then we can even go h4, and then he can go a4. But again, we don't have to take. If we take, that's really bad. Now black will win this endgame, but we don't have to take. We can just continue with a move like g5, and if he takes, we can take back easily, and we're going to put him in Zugzwang. And once his king goes back, then our king can go forward, and this is just going to be a winning endgame. He goes back, we continue with f5, takes, and now this is a completely winning endgame. So the way you deal with these phantom pawns is you don't want to take, and you don't want to undouble their pawns. Instead, you want them to take you, or you want them to push forward. It doesn't matter. As long as you don't take them. That's what's really important in these phantom pawn concepts.